Maayong aga sa inyo tanan-tanan. Blessing as always to gather together with you. Looking forward to getting into the book of Hebrews once again. But before we do, let's open up with a word of prayer. Salamat liwat Gino para sa niyadlaw, Father. We just thank you for the opportunity as always, Lord, to spend some time meeting with you through your word. Lord, your word is alive. Lord, your word is truth. Lord, your word is how we know your will. And so, Lord, we just pray this morning, Lord, as we gather together, Lord, as we get into your word, that you speak mightily, clearly to our hearts, instructing us, guiding us, Lord, helping us to become more like you. So, Lord, we give you this time. We praise you and thank you. In Jesus' name we say, Amen. We recall something that as we've been going through the book of Hebrews, we have seen that Jesus is better than everyone and everything. Paglabaw siya sa tanan gid. He's better than the prophets because he proclaims the word of God. He is the word of God. He's better than the angels because he's the creator of everything, including the angels. He's a better servant even than Moses, who was the greatest of all of the servants in the Old Testament. For Moses was a servant in his house. Jesus is the creator of the house. He's a better rest because only through him can we have rest from our war with sin. He gives us victory over sin. Also, we saw that he's a better priest. He's a better high priest is something we've been going over for the last month, dealing with this idea that he is a better mediator. He's the one that gives us access into the very throne room of God. And in light of that, we were given a warning that we need to mature. Since Jesus is our access into heaven itself, we need to grow in him, get closer to him, depend upon him, adlaw. For if we do not, there's a danger of falling away, of losing our footing, which is why he becomes our anchor. And this is what we saw last week. He is the anchor for our soul. How does Jesus anchor us, hold us secure, so we're not in danger of falling away? By giving us better promises. Promises that God for sure will fulfill, for God never lets anyone down. We saw that in the example of Abraham. As we are patient and have faith, God is always faithful to do everything that he declares, including bring us home, give us salvation. He also, though, just gives us a guarantee, not just his promise, but his oath, his guarantee of the Holy Spirit assuring us God is going to finish in us the work that he began. But ultimately, Jesus Christ himself is our anchor, rooted in that throne room of God, who holds us firmly to the day he brings us home. Our high priest is also our anchor to hold us fast to the Lord. Well, that being the case, we pick up this morning in Hebrews chapter 7, as we finally come to the description of Melchizedek. Let's pick up. Hebrews chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed Abraham, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being translated king of righteousness, then also king of Salem, meaning the king of peace. He is without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Now consider how great this man was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of his spoils. And indeed, those who are the sons of Levi, who receive the priesthood, have a commandment to receive tithes from the people according to the law, that is, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. But he whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham, and blessed him who had the promises. Now, beyond all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the greater. Here, mortal men receive tithes, but there he received them, of whom it is witnessed that he lives forever. Even Levi, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, so to speak. For he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. So as we come now to the 7th chapter, we're going to see the final description of Melchizedek. Now this man Melchizedek, only mentioned in 2 places in the Old Testament. He's in Genesis chapter 14, also referenced in Psalm chapter 110 verse 4, we've already seen mentioned 3 times in the book of Hebrews. Twice, so we look at the Old Testament, 3 times before we even get to chapter 7. Obviously, someone rather important for us. He was going to be described, if you recall back in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 6. The author said, I have much to say about this Melchizedek. But then he went on to explain that the hearers were immature and could not handle the depth of the conversation. But having established that they are rooted, anchored, firm in Jesus Christ, he now goes into describing just who this Melchizedek is. And he'll mention him another 7 times just in this chapter. So get the picture. Twice mentioned in the Old Testament, 10 times in the book of Hebrews. 3 times before this chapter, 7 times in this chapter. So no question, no doubt, Hebrews chapter 7 is all about Melchizedek. So who was this man? Who was Melchizedek? Notice in verse 1, he was first and foremost a king. He was a haughty, but he was a king in 2 different ways. He was the king of righteousness and the king of peace. Now his name itself gives us this first definition of being king of righteousness. For the name Melchizedek is a compound word. Melech, Tzedek. In the Hebrew that means Melech, haughty, king, Tzedek, of righteousness. So he's the king of righteousness. It is in his very name. Now the idea here is that he is the one who's the king of what is right to be done. How to live, we might say, a right life. Now this is important because, of course, Jesus, being in the order of Melchizedek, having that priesthood from Melchizedek, is a king just as Melchizedek was. Jesus tells us how to live a right life. The world is constantly trying to tell us what is important for us. They try to tell us what's a priority, how we should live our lives. We should prioritize education. Importante get my education. The word preaches that from the youngest years on up through our college years. The world preaches it's important to have kwarta. Basta may kwarta, tanan-tanan sa imong kabuhi, tawhay na lang. Life gets easier the more money you have. The world is constantly trying to give us our priorities and teach us how to live our life. But Jesus is the King of righteousness. He shows us how to live a right life before God. His life is the example, the pattern we follow to know the way God desires us to live. For Jesus, make no mistake about it, Revelation chapter 19 verse 16, is the King of all kings and the Lord of all lords. But he was also the King of peace. Now the word here for peace, salem, comes from the Hebrew word shalom. So he's the king of kalinom, the king of peace. He's who gives us our peace. Now, we're told actually in the Old Testament in Psalm chapter 48 verse 2 that the king of the great city is Jerusalem. So Jesus is the king of Jerusalem. The word Jerusalem comes from peace. So he is the king of our peace. We live in very interesting times. If there's one thing we seem to be short on today, it is peace. We don't have any rest. Wala kalinom. There's no confidence in what will take place tomorrow. It can lead, frankly, to a lot of stress. We worry, what's the latest, report from the LGU? What lockdown's going to happen next? Are we going to be, ECQ, MCQ, GCQ? Oh, that'd be nice. All these different uncertainties that surround us in our current environment, in our current world. But the reality is our peace does not come from our circumstances. Woe unto us if we think it does. We're going to have a very troublesome life. Our peace is not in our circumstances. Our peace is in a person. Ephesians chapter 2 verse 14 tells us Jesus is our peace. He is the King of peace. If we have Jesus, if we're looking to Jesus, that's when there is peace in our heart. There is peace in our lives. So who was Melchizedek? He was a king, the King of righteousness and the King of peace. But notice also, he wasn't just king there in verse 1. Melchizedek was also the priest. This is interesting, for this is in contradiction to everything we see in the Old Testament. For in the Old Testament, there were kings and there were priests, never the same person. The kings were responsible for the practical needs of the people. They protected them from the enemies from without. They helped provide for their natural needs, their daily concerns. They were the ones who took care of the physical needs of the congregation. The priests, in contrast, took care of the spiritual needs of the people. They didn't go to battle. They didn't go to war. They went to their knees and they went to prayer. They offered the sacrifices. Two very different roles. The king took care of the practical. The priest took care of the spiritual. God divided these for a very good reason. He never wanted anyone to depend on one person for everything. There was a king who thought he could. Back in the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 26, there was a king named Uzziah. Now, Uzziah was a very good king. He had reigned for some 52 years. He was one of the longest reigning kings of any king who reigned over either Judah or Israel. But in his later years, he got a bit arrogant. He got a bit tikalon. He was cocky. He thought, I can be more than just king. I can also minister to the people spiritually. I can be the priest as well. And so this very good, very noble, very well-loved king tried to go into the temple and offer incense before the Lord, a job that was restricted only to the priests. God struck him with leprosy and killed him. He ended up spending his last days isolated from everyone because he tried to be both king and priest. God never allowed it. You could not be both because God did not want men looking to one man for everything that they needed. You know, I've been accused on more than one occasion that whatever problem people may happen to bring or mention to me, they come and they say, hey, pastor, may problema ni. And the problem maybe is a financial problem. Kulang akong kwarta. Wala bugas. You know, life is tough right now. Okay. Ang iba, they come and say, hey, pastor, I've got a problem with my relationship. My wife, buang siya. Ako may mga bata, buang man sila. And they go, wow, man, my family right now, it just really needs help. Oh, okay. Ang iba, they come and they say, hey, pastor, man, layan matiyag ko. I don't feel good. Man, I'm struggling with COVID or biskanano lang, whatever particular sickness or infirmity happens to hit them. And they come and they say, I need help, I need prayer. It's funny because no matter what people come with as a need, the answer given is always the same one. The answer is always Jesus. Kulang kwarta? Jesus is your provider. Hey, may problema sa pamilya? Jesus is the one who can heal relationships. Hey, layan matiyag ka? Jesus is your healer. Because unlike any man, Jesus is both king and priest, for he is all that we need. He takes care of every physical need. He takes care of every spiritual need. Jesus is absolutely everything that we require. Melchizedek was a king and a priest. But notice there in verse 1 again, he was a priest to the Most High God. Now this is interesting. For if you go back to the book of Genesis chapter 14 verse 18, where this title is used for the very first time, it is the Hebrew word El Elyon, God Most High. God who has no one higher than him. He is sababaw gid. No one is greater than him. This is who Melchizedek pointed people to. This is who Melchizedek was a priest of. And I like this because it explains why we always give the answer to people of Jesus Christ. If men have a choice, they will look to us for answers. When your neighbor comes knocking on your door and says, hey, could you help out? The intrinsic response is we want to say, yes, pwede mabulig sa imo. I want to help you out. I want to show you the love of Jesus Christ. I want to be someone who aids you. But the problem is we're limited. How much can we help? How often can we help? We can give rice one day, maybe loan someone some pesos, give them some money. But how many times? And how many people? We have limited resources, therefore we are not someone you want to teach to depend upon. We don't want people looking to us. We point people to El Elyon, God Most High. We point people to a God who has no limitations, nothing that he cannot do, God whom nothing is impossible. We, like Melchizedek, point people to a God who is greater than all. This is our calling, by the way. We're meant to point people to Jesus Christ, no matter what problem, no matter what troubles or circumstances they may be going through. So Melchizedek was king of peace, king of righteousness. He was priest to the Most High God. But there's something else we notice. Notice there in verses 1 and 2, not only do we see Melchizedek mentioned 7 times just in this chapter, who was king and priest, but we see that he was greater even than Father Abraham. For we're told, Melchizedek met Abraham when he returned from the slaughter of the kings. Now this is a direct reference back to Genesis chapter 14. What had taken place is Lot, the nephew of Abraham, had chosen to go live in the city of Sodom. Now, this in of itself is not a good thing. If you can recall, Sodom and Gomorrah, not very godly places. So Lot was living in a bad situation. He chose the wrong place to lay his roots. But there were kings from Babylon who came to fight against the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they defeated them. And when they defeated them, they took all of the people, all of the wealth of Sodom and Gomorrah captive, including Lot. Now we're told Abraham heard about this, found out Lot had been captured by the kings of Babylon. And what he did was he raised up 318 men from his own house. Abraham was quite the guy. He had a lot of servants, a lot of men who helped and ministered alongside of him. He took those men and he went to war. And Abraham defeated the entire army of Babylon. Now this is impressive, 318 men and he wipes out the entire army that had defeated Sodom and Gomorrah. And when he was returning from this victory, having overcome the world, having won his nephew Lot back from captivity, that's when Melchizedek met him. Now, turn with me, if you will. This is important to read because this is really the basis of everything we're talking about. To Genesis chapter 14. Read along with me. In Genesis chapter 14, beginning in verse 18, we're given this introduction of Abraham to Melchizedek. We're told, verse 14, then Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the king of peace, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of the Most High God, El Elyon. And he blessed Abraham and said, blessed be Abram, God of the Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. Then Abraham gave Melchizedek a tithe of all. Now, this word tithe or tenth is where we get the idea, by the way, of tithing. This is the very first time it's mentioned in the whole Bible. And the idea is Abraham met Melchizedek, and he then tithed to Melchizedek 10% of everything that he possessed, all that Abraham had. Now we mentioned, Mangaran and Abraham, he had 318 men in his house. He had a lot of money. 10% of all of it was given to Melchizedek. Why? Hebrews chapter 7, verse 7 will answer for us, because always the lesser is blessed by the greater. And since Melchizedek blessed Abraham, Melchizedek was better than Abraham. Now stop right there, because that should raise a question. Abraham is amazing. In terms of a biblical character, a man who we read about in the Bible, really there is no one greater than Abraham. He is the father of the Jewish nation. He is the very first Hebrew. Not only is he the father of the Jewish nation, according to Romans chapter 4, verse 12, he's the father of faith. So we, kita tanan, if you have faith in Jesus Christ, we are the children of Abraham. That says he is amazing. He is greater than any other man. So how is Melchizedek greater than him? There's a hint in our passage. For go back to that Genesis chapter 14, verse 18, and we're told the first thing Melchizedek did was brought out bread and wine. Now those ought to seem very familiar to us. What other place in the Bible do we see bread and wine? Well, obviously the communion, the Last Supper of Jesus Christ. For Jesus took the wine and said, "This is my blood, which is a new covenant given to you." And then he took the bread and he broke it, and he said, "This is my body that is broken for you." The bread and the wine are the picture of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice, which is where we get the idea of why Melchizedek was greater. Because he represented the salvation, the hope, the sacrifice that Abraham had faith in. Listen, Abraham was great because he had faith in God. Melchizedek was greater because he represented the salvation that Abraham was looking forward to. He pictured Jesus Christ, who is our hope. And this is the whole idea, is that Melchizedek was greater even than Father Abraham. There's a fifth thing that we notice about Melchizedek there in verse 3. We've seen that the whole chapter is about him. He's king, he's priest, he's also greater than Abraham. But number 5, his genealogy. He has none. We're not given any reference to his mother. We're not told who was his father. We're not given any of his descendants. We're told nothing about him. Now, just so that you recognize, this does not mean specifically he did not have a mother or father. It's just a reference to the fact that in the book of Genesis, there is no mention of his mother, father, or genealogy. And the purpose of this was a contrast. A contrast because, para sa mga pari, the Jewish priests, their genealogy meant everything. For in order to be a Jewish priest, you had to first and foremost be from the tribe of Levi. Now you may recall back in the book of Exodus chapter 32, when Israel rebelled against the Lord there at the foot of Mount Sinai. As Moses was receiving the 10 Commandments, Israel was making a golden calf. And when Moses came down, he shattered the commandments and said, "Who is ever on the Lord's side, come and stand with me." Sa bilog, sa tribo, sa Levi, tindag kay Moses. Every one of the people of Levi followed after Moses. And because of this, God chose Levi to be the priestly tribe. So if you were to be a priest, you had to first of all be a Levite. You had to come from the tribe of Levi. Your genealogy had to be the right one. But not just from the tribe of Levi, you had to be a descendant of Aaron, the older brother of Moses. According to Numbers chapter 18, verse 1, only the descendants of Aaron could serve in the priesthood. Now, Aaron was a Levite, so he qualified as being a Levite. But you had to additionally be one of his children, his descendants, in order to become a priest, because the genealogy for the priests was everything for their qualification. Yet, Melchizedek has no reference, has no mother, has no father, has no genealogy, because he was from a better high priest. He was from a better priesthood. More on that in a minute. But notice number 6. Not only did he have no genealogy, he also had no beginning or end. There in verse 3, we're not told when he was born, and we're not told when he died. Now the idea being is if we're not told when he died, maybe he never died. This is what leads some to believe that Melchizedek wasn't just a man, but Melchizedek was genuinely an appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. It's known as a Christophany. Jesus coming and appearing before men before his birth, his incarnate here upon the earth in the New Testament. It's possible that that is the case, because we are told that Abraham met Jesus. Jesus himself said so in John chapter 8, verse 56. Jesus said that Abraham saw my day. Abraham saw me, and he rejoiced. When did Abraham see Jesus Christ? Well, one of the possibilities is here in Genesis 14 when he met Melchizedek, if indeed Melchizedek was Jesus Christ, a pre-incarnate Christ. But that may not be the case because of one phrase right here in verse 3. For notice, we're told that Melchizedek was made like the Son of God. That word like means similar appearance, made a copy of, similar to. Now, Jesus wasn't like the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God. John chapter 20, verse 31. The whole New Testament declares, the Gospels tell us, Jesus is the Son of God, the second person in the Trinity. Therefore, it's likely that Melchizedek was not Jesus. He was a picture of Jesus. Some people speculate actually he was probably Shem. If you remember that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Shem lived well into the life of Abraham. And it's very possible that godly Shem, who became the ruler of the city of Jerusalem, the king of Salem, came out to meet Abraham, and therefore Abraham gave him a tithe. So practically, likely just a person, possibly Shem, but the picture, no question, is of Jesus Christ. For the idea here is that Melchizedek represents a greater priesthood than the line of Aaron. Which is why Psalm chapter 110 verse 4 says, the Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, an everlasting priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek. So who was he? Well, Hebrews 7's all about him. He was king. He was priest. He was greater than Abraham. He had no genealogy in contrast to the Levites. And he was a picture of Jesus Christ, who has no beginning, no end. He is everlasting. Well, that brings us to the second thing we want to notice there in verse 4, which is this description of how he was better than Abraham. Let's pick up. For we see in verse 4 it says, consider how great this man was. Now the word consider is a command. We are told we must consider how much more amazing, how much greater. That word great there means huge, large, overwhelmingly better than even our father Abraham, because Abraham gave a tenth of all he had to him. Now stop right here. For this word tenth is where we get our word, as we mentioned previously, tithe. It is actually the first time a tithe ever appears in the Bible when Abraham gives to Melchizedek. But what I found unique is this word tithe only appears 10 times in the entire New Testament. Now stop and chew on that for a moment. Think about that. If you come to church, if you've ever been to church, spend any amount of time in church, you've heard about tithing. Churches like to talk about it. We frequently mention how it's important that you make sure you give your tithe to the Lord. Hey, tithing, giving that 10% is what God requires. The word only appears 10 times in the entire New Testament. And you ready for this? 7 of them. 7 of those 10 times are right here in these 10 verses in Hebrews 7. So 70% of all of the mentioning of tithe in all of the New Testament is in these 10 verses, which tells us if you want to know about tithing, read these 10 verses. Well, what does these 10 verses tell us about tithing? It says that Abraham tithed because for certain the lesser is always blessed by the greater. Abraham recognized that Melchizedek, a picture of Jesus Christ, was greater than him. Therefore, he blessed the greater by giving a tithe to him. Why do we tithe? Why do we give to the Lord? What is the New Testament principle behind tithing? Like Abraham, it is recognizing that God is greater than we are. That God is the one who's blessed us. Therefore, we give back to Him because of all He's already given to us. I think sometimes we get this idea that I have made myself who I am. I went to school. I studied hard. I was very diligent. I got a good education. I went out and tried hard and got a good job. I'm a smart individual. I'm a strong person. As if somehow any of these things come from us. Who gave us our mind to think? Who puts the air in our lungs every day so that we can breathe? Who gives us our muscles so that we can move? Frankly, who orchestrates every circumstance around us to allow us to even be blessed? Quite frankly, everything we have comes from God, who is greater than us. Every blessing, every peso we possess is something that He has given. Therefore, we give back in a sense of showing our respect, our reverence, to show our concern, our love for our God who's given so much to us. This is the New Testament picture of tithing. Mind you, again, 7 times in this chapter alone, out of the 10 total in all of the New Testament, and it comes from this idea of us giving back to the one who's blessed us with everything that we have. But it's worth mentioning, there are 3 other mentions of the word tithing in the New Testament. We said 7 of the 10 are here in Hebrews chapter 7. Where are the other 3? And it turns out it is important where those other 3 are. For the other 3 are always used in reference to Pharisees, religious leaders, giving to be seen by men. Matthew chapter 23, verse 23 is one of those particular instances where Jesus says, "Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay a tithe," there's your word, "but have neglected the weightier matters of the law, love and justice." In other words, they were giving to be seen. They tithed so everyone would know how righteous, how good and holy they were. Their motive wasn't to give back to the one who had blessed them, to show their reverence to the one who had given them everything they had. Their desire was to be seen by men and receive the glory of men. So in this we see a contrast. 7 times the word tithe is used in relation to giving back to the one who's given us everything. The other 3 times the word tithe is used in the New Testament, it shows hypocrisy. Trying to present ourselves as more than we are, seeking the glory and the recognition of those around us. This is why Jesus would say in Matthew chapter 6, verse 2, "When you give." Now stop right there. The word is actually a question. It reads "when you give," but it's in the subjunctive. It's in an uncertain outcome. Literally, we could say "if you give." It's not required. It's just saying if you happen to give, do so not as the hypocrites do, calling attention to themselves. Have you ever noticed that when an offering plate gets passed, it's a bit awkward? You sit there and you go, I got some pesos in my pocket. You don't want to be seen as the cheap guy that's not going to give to God. And so you're rummaging through and you pull out a couple of pesos and you let them slide in real quiet because you don't want anybody to hear the coins clinking because, coins is not much to give to the Lord. But at least you put your hand in the basket and you gave something, right? Pero iban, if they really want to be impressive, they'll whip out that 500, make sure that everybody around them sees. Hold up just a little bit higher than the chairs so you can see that golden, piece of paper dip into the basket. Ooh, wow, he really must be a godly individual. Look how much he gave to the Lord. Giving for the recognition of men. Jesus said this is not the way we are to give. We give because God has given us everything. We don't give to be seen by others. Which is why, by the way, if you walk into church on a Sunday morning, we don't pass an offering basket. Some people find that unusual. There's no offering call. There's no offering song. There's not a box up in front of the pulpit. That's a little bit like giving before men, if you ask me. That you have to walk up and slip those pesos in. We don't do that. What do? We do what King Jehoash did. For in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 9, King Jehoash wanted to remodel the temple, but not wanting to have people give in a way that brought attention to themselves, he put a box by the door and drilled a hole in the top. Then Biscancino, anybody who wanted to, could give quietly, give anonymously, give genuinely from their heart to the Lord. And that's the desire. There's the contrast. We don't give like the Pharisees, those three mentions, wanting to draw attention to ourselves. We give like Abraham, recognizing that God has blessed us with everything we have, and therefore we want to give back to the Lord. The second thing we want to notice in verse 4 is, what did Abraham give? For notice, it says Abraham gave the spoils. Now this word spoils, that it gets a bilog sa New Testament, carries the idea of the very best. Abraham didn't give the leftovers. He didn't give the things he did not want. When Abraham gave to the Lord, who had given him everything, he gave the best back to the Lord. If I go out to get some lunch in Isal barbecue, there at Manokong Country, I will always save the bones afterwards. I have the meat, eat the best parts, nice rice, garlic rice by the way, just tastes better. Dip in a little bit of calamansi, some patis, beautiful meal, wonderful, tasty. But when it's done, I take the bones and keep them for the dog. Now, the bones are the part I do not want. And when I throw the bones to the dog, what I'm saying is that I think the dog is less than me, for I'm giving him the leftovers. Sadly, this is often how we treat God. God who gave us everything, God who is greater than we are, what we give back to him is the bones, the things we don't want, the leftovers, saying we think God is less than we are. Listen, Abraham got it. Abraham understood it. We don't give our leftovers to the Lord. We don't give the things that we don't care about. We should give the very best of all God has blessed us with to him, showing the Lord how important he is to us, showing him we believe he is greater than us. Hey, Melchizedek was greater than Abraham. Abraham showed it by giving a tithe of all he had of his very best to El Elyon, the God Most High. But that brings us to a third thing we want to notice. We've seen first and foremost who Melchizedek was, priest, king. We've seen that Abraham understood that Melchizedek was greater than he was, showed it by giving a tithe of all the best that he had. But the third thing we notice is that Melchizedek represents a better priesthood. Melchizedek gives us a better priesthood. Notice there in verses 5 through 10. As you pick up, the first thing we see about this better priesthood is that the Levites also received a tithe. Now, this was the Old Testament command. According to the law of Moses, mga pari, mga Levito, they received tithes from the congregation. Now, there were actually 3 different kinds of tithes. We don't hear as much about this. It's not often preached or taught on, but there wasn't just one tithe in the law. There was 3. According to Numbers chapter 18, verses 21 through 24, there was the Levitical tithe. The Levitical tithe was the 10% you gave to provide for the Levites, for they had no land, they had no inheritance. The people provided for them so they could serve the Lord. But there was a second tithe. According to Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 22 through 26, there was the first fruits tithe. You gave the first fruits of all you had to the Lord, and the same idea is to show the fact that he is greater than you. You gave the best back to him. But there was a third tithe. According to Numbers chapter 14, verses 28 through 29, the third tithe was a tithe for the poor. Those who were mga pigado, you gave 10% of all you had to them, but that tithe was only once every 3 years. So divided out, that's 3.5% per year. So you take it all together, 10% for the Levites, 10% for the first fruits, 3.5% every year for a total of 10% for the poor. So you tithe 23.5% according to the law of Moses. We smile at this. Because if you get the idea that you must tithe, that a tithe is required, then don't tithe 10%, tithe 23%. People who sit there and go, you need to give your 10% to God. Well, no, it's 23% to God if you want to follow the law. But if you want to follow the law, it's not just tithing, by the way, because you can't pick and choose from the law. You can't say, I want to follow this particular law, but ignore all the rest. There's 613 commands in the law of Moses in all. So if you want to bind yourself to the law of tithing, to the Old Testament covenant, give 23% and also follow the other 610 commandments that exist within the law. Don't recommend that, but there is a law for the Old Testament regarding giving to the Levites. There's a second thing we notice in relation to this better priesthood there in verses 6 through 8, and that's that Melchizedek received a better tithe. For Melchizedek was not a descendant of Abraham. Notice there in verse 6. He whose genealogy is not derived from them, referring to the Levites, received tithes from Abraham, and he blessed Abraham who had the promises, referring to the promises of Genesis chapter 12. So Melchizedek, not from the line of Abraham, not a descendant of Abraham, yet he received tithes from Abraham and blessed him, which means Melchizedek is greater than Abraham because beyond all contradiction, verse 7, the lesser is blessed by the greater. I like how this is put in the New Living Translation. Hebrews 7:7 in the New Living Translation says, the priests who collect tithes are men who die. So Melchizedek is greater than them because we're told that Melchizedek lives on. So get the contrast. The Old Testament tithe was given to flawed men. When you tithe to the Levites, you were giving to men who needed it. If you did not tithe, they wouldn't have food. They had no resources apart from what the people gave to them. And even if you did tithe to them, they still didn't last. They eventually died. In contrast, the tithe given to Melchizedek wasn't necessary. For you see, Melchizedek, being a picture of Jesus Christ, has no needs. And no matter what you give or didn't give, Melchizedek carried on, for he is eternal. Therefore, giving the way that Abraham gave to Melchizedek is a better tithe than what was given to the Levites. We would call this a New Testament principle of tithing. For the idea is that God needs nothing. God's not poor. God does not lack. I'm often amused because you listen to some pastors or different preachers, and if you paid attention to their words, you'd think, grabe, pigado ang Ginoo. Wala kwarta. Masi inaubos na siya. He has no money. Apparently God needs mine because he ran out. God needs money? No, how foolish a thought is that? God in 6 days created the entire heavens and the earth, the universe and all of its galaxies. What does he lack for? What could God possibly ever need? Listen, God doesn't need anything. We don't have to give to him. We desire to give to him so that we show him that he is greater than us. That we want to bless him for how much he's blessed us. Nothing is required. It is a better tithe given to a better priesthood, to a priest who never dies. So often you get this idea that, if you don't give your tithe, you're robbing God. Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. No, God needs nothing. Which is why we're told in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, God desires that each man give joyfully. Whatever is on his heart, freely, not out of constraint, not out of obligation, but to give as the Lord puts on the heart. The better tithe is not a requirement. The better tithe is not a specific amount. The better tithe is biska na no lang. Give 10%? Great. Give 23% if you want to. Give 100%. Hey, go for it. We're not more righteous if we do. We're not less righteous if we don't. It's not about what we give. It's about a desire to show that we understand that God is greater, God has blessed us, and we want to put Him in that position of being more valuable, more important than anyone or anything else in our lives. This is the New Testament principle of tithing. This is the better tithe of Melchizedek. But notice, it's not just the Levitical Old Testament that was not a good portion of tithing. It's not just the New Testament better principle of tithing. We notice in verses 9 through 10 that even the Levites tithed to Melchizedek. Notice there in verse 9. According to the law, the Levites did not pay any tithes. For Levites who received tithes did not give them. Now, the reason why the Levites did not receive any tithes was because their inheritance was the Lord, according to Joshua chapter 13, verse 33. They did not have any land. They did not work the land. They received instead tithes from the people, but they did not then tithe back out. Yet, the Levites did tithe to Melchizedek, so to speak. They did so through Abraham. For Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob, or Israel. Israel was the father of Levi. So Levi was the great-grandson of Abraham. So when Abraham tithed to Melchizedek, in a sense, Levi was still a part of him, for Levi would eventually become his great-grandson. So since Levi was still a part of Abraham, when he tithed to Melchizedek, in a sense, we're told then that Levi then tithed to Melchizedek as well. Why is that important? Because it shows us that the priesthood of Melchizedek is greater than the priesthood of Levi, the priesthood of Aaron. More on that Decimana when we pick up in the remainder of chapter 7. But as a closing thought, wrapping this all up, pulling it all together, I found it powerful that Abraham, who tithed to Melchizedek, recognizing that he was greater, wanting to bless God who had blessed him with everything, giving his best to the Lord, saw the result in his great-grandchildren becoming priests. Now, as we've stated, God doesn't need anything. If we give to God, we don't give to God, God is not richer, God is not poor, God never lacks. But there is a real blessing para sa aton. When we give to the Lord, give the best to the Lord, give freely, not out of obligation, not for the recognition of others, to God, it sets an example for our children because they see us investing in God. We're told in Luke chapter 12, verse 34, that where our treasures are, there our heart is also. Hey, our kids are watching. Our grandkids are watching. If we're old enough, base may edad na, may apo sa tuhod man are watching us. And the question is what do they see us as investing in? What do they see us as showing as important? You know, do we give Sunday morning, isa ka oras na lang sa Ginoo? Or do we give it all? Do we show that our lives are dedicated to the Lord? For He has blessed us with everything, and therefore we want to invest back everything in Him. When we have that example, when we have that heart, it doesn't just transform our lives, it transforms the lives of our families, our children, our loved ones around us. Melchizedek was a picture of Jesus Christ. Abraham gave to the one who blessed him with everything. Let's pray. Salamat liwat Ginoo para sa niyadlaw, Father. We just thank you for the chance to get into your word, Lord, and be able to see this beautiful picture of Melchizedek. Lord, a man who was both king and priest. All we ever need. Lord, for you are our all in all. Lord, you are everything as far as our practical, our spiritual. You provide us with everything that is needed on a daily basis. And Lord, our heart should be like Abraham, then to just give it all back to you. Or to invest in you, not out of some sense of obligation and certainly not for the recognition of others. But Lord, that we show you our heart. Lord, show you how much we value you. Lord, invest in you so we have a heart for you. Because Jesus, life is certainly all about you. Lord, we love you. We praise you. We thank you. It's in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. Read ahead. We'll finish up chapter 7, Desun Simana, as we see the better priesthood of Jesus Christ. We've seen he's a better high priest. Having laid the foundation with Melchizedek, we're going to see he's a better priesthood than the Old Testament. For as we've seen over and over, and will continue, Jesus is better than everyone and everything. God bless you guys. Love you. See you Desun Simana naman.